next speaker is Dr. Carmen Boulter, and I want to tell you a little story about Carmen. Before, is right. Before the last trip to Egypt that my wife and I took, I wanted to show her some videos. So we were looking at some YouTube things and watching some different programs so my wife, who'd never been, could get some background and the message of ancient Egypt. So we were watching the Pyramid Code. And my wife was just so enthralled by the presentation and Carmen, and so I said very proudly to my wife, I know her. And so now, Carmen, come up here, because I want my wife to see us standing together. Carmen is the greatest spokesperson for all of this. And not only that, she has the most fantastic pictures that are brand new that you're going to be one of the first people to see of some of the most important symbols in Egypt. Here we go.
All right. Can you hear me? Okay, so even if you had come to Egypt, the things I'm going to show you, I'm trying to put this microphone thing down, are way, way up high, 40 feet high. And, you can point to things, but it's very difficult to see. And years ago, the ceiling of the Temple of Dendera was totally dark because they used to keep animals in there. When the Christians came to destroy the temples, they built mud brick buildings around. And they left their animals in there and they didn't want to muck out, so then they burned the dung, which made the ceiling dark, if you can believe it. Okay, so Chris Dunn's with us, and he's done a lot of work on the engineering of these pillars. And anyway, so I'm going to get into the symbolism. Just trying to get oriented here. So you can see that black square. That's what the whole ceiling looked like. So when Napoleon went and had his artists sketch out the ceiling, which is all we had to go on for a good long time before they cleaned it, that's what they were looking at. But those drawings aren't very accurate. So I've had the opportunity to go to the Rare Books Library in the Hermitage Museum, where the originals of these huge books, 3 feet by 2 feet, are of these drawings. And the other thing that I did to prepare myself for this lecture is I read a 400-page book on everything that's been said about the ceiling of the Temple of Dendera, and most of the people were hanging out with Freud and Champollion, and it was 19th century men who would come up with one word for all the symbolism that's on that ceiling: agriculture, zodiac. And then they all had different dates. So if you've got 10 people speculating and theorizing about something like the ceiling, and they can come up with all different, nobody agrees about anything, what do we really have there? But that doesn't stop our fascination with it. So what you see here is Nui, who is bending over the overarching part of the ceiling. So this is the first hypostyle hall of the Temple of Hathor at Dendera, and there are 2 Nui figures. This is a vast thing on either side, facing toward, or with the hands and feet facing toward the center. There are symbols all over the entirety of the walls and the ceiling. What's true, what seems to be true, is that the ceiling is the cosmology, the walls are the terrestrial. And if you're really going to boil down what ancient Egypt is doing in the simplest terms, they were concerned with 2 things. One was cosmology, what happens when we leave, and the other is biology, how do we come here, and what's it all about. So as I go through these slides, you're going to see details of these pictures. Now, there's what's called an analema. You often see these necklaces on the ancient Egyptians, King Tut, and they look like little beads. But what they actually are is the star patterns of different planets, and how things, if you were to take a picture every day in the same place, you would see how Mars has a certain pattern, Venus has a certain pattern, and that's actually what she's wearing on her neck. And so the other thing is hands point down into a shape that comes up like this, and that's actually the hieroglyphic for plasma. And so this is far more cosmic than you would imagine. but it's also all about precession. Now, I've been studying this for a long time, and the only person that's ever made any sense to me about it, her name is Svetlana Pavlova. And I had the opportunity to interview her in Russia about 10 days ago. But 3 days before I went to Russia, she had a massive stroke. And they said she'd be in the hospital for 3 to 4 weeks. And I didn't realize she knew about my work, but the Pyramid Code had a proper Russian soundtrack, and it aired on Russian TV. And so she really wanted me to interview her. So she got up out of the hospital and entertained us at her home, and we brought a translator with us, and it was really, really very exciting. Her whole house is, filled with Egyptian things, and she's coming from a place of memory, okay? And that's a lot of the ways that I've done my work, has been through getting a hypothesis through some kind of cellular memory of past lives, feeling obsessed with certain things because I needed to understand it, and I recognized right away from her home, from all the Egyptian symbols that she had, that she also has been, a slave to her memories her whole life. And so she became an engineer. She's an astrophysicist. She's a professor was a professor at a university, and her whole thing was about deciphering the ceiling. And I feel really satisfied and comfortable with what she said, and it also lines up with things I already thought. So, what you're seeing right here, if you'll look on the top left corner, is a ram with 4 heads and wings, and a thymus right through the heart space. And in the Pyramid Code, you've seen that symbol. Hakim, the indigenous wisdom keeper, talked about this being the gland that stimulates procreation, okay? And so you often see that as a crown, and they called it Upper and Lower Egypt, which has nothing to do with anything. And so this is basically talking about the large cycles of time, and the 4 heads have to do with the ages of precession. 2 looking back, 2 looking forward, and it goes on from there. Okay, so here again, I have an enlargement of this in the next slide, but on the left, you see another ram with another thymus at the same position. And so all of these different things the boats are decans, she called them, Svetlana calls them, and so these are measurements of time. And the Egyptians had 3 10-day weeks. We have 4 7-day weeks. They had 360 days a year, and then there was a major catastrophe that knocked the axis of the Earth to its side, and then all of a sudden we had 365 days. So instead of reconfiguring their calendar, the Egyptians ended up having 5 days at a time and gave one to each of 5 gods and goddesses: Isis, Osiris, Nephthys, Set, and Horus. So what you see here is the idea of procreation, the idea of the zodiac, riding on solar boats. On the bottom, on the left, you see, whenever you see a figure pointing their thumb at their mouth and one tuft of hair, that means child. The symbol of the sacred feminine is the lotus, and what you see is a child being born out of the lotus. Okay, and then the second one as well, and they're each in their own decan. There's an enlargement of the thymus and the ram, and to my astonishment, last time, there's an avenue of the sphinxes that goes between the Luxor temple and the Karnak temple. There's 2,000 sphinxes that go for 3 kilometers, but there were houses built over the top, very much like the Hypogeum in Malta, and the government decided they won't kick everybody out, but they also won't let the people sell their homes, so they had to wait like 75 years for people to die, and then they ended up reconfiguring this avenue of the sphinxes, and so they're recreating them, and it goes all the way to Karnak. And I've been there many times of the day and night, but on this last trip, I ended up noticing that every single one of them, the way the light was shining at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, both sides, every single one of them has the thymus in it. 2,000 of them all the way. So that's kind of significant. So here you see, once they clean the ceiling, okay, they're not allowed to add paint in Egypt. They're allowed to take off soot and take off mold, okay? And so cleaning it is about taking something off, not adding something. So once they first cleaned it, they left the way it used to be. So 40 feet up in the air, with this darkness all over it, it was incredibly difficult to be able to see it, let alone interpret it. So it's been cleaned for a few years, but it still hasn't been interpreted in a way like I hope we can do today. So that's what it used to look like, and people were still really curious about it. And like I said, the only drawings we had came from Napoleon's artists, and he had the figures facing backwards. They had all kinds of mistakes in them. Okay, so again, you see the star systems, you see various kinds of beings, snakes. There's hieroglyphic along the side, and they're really telling the story archetypally. And an archetype is something that exists whether you know about it or not. And then we get into the zodiac. Now, there's different phases of the sun, phases of the year, in the ancient Egyptian tongue called Suf. And the scarab is the representation of a new era, the dawn. So basically what you see here with the decans floating along and the scarab is, and you see this, the child again with the thumb pointed toward. You see the constellation of Leo being represented. And there was an ancient proverb. I've come across it in my research 3 times. Twice it was said that it was Atlantean, and Svetlana said, no, it's Mayan. Okay, but I work with the idea of a third-party hypothesis that the Atlanteans had advanced knowledge. There's some way that they knew that there was going to be catastrophes. And the first past life reading I had, I was told that I was on an evacuation committee when there was foreknowledge that there was going to be some kind of major Earth catastrophe. And what were we going to do to preserve the people and the knowledge? And that's when, as a seafaring culture, there were different expeditions that went various places to build pyramids. That seems to make sense. And the prophecy was, when the head of the crab hits the heart of the lion, that will indicate that that's the measurement of the catastrophe, which basically is saying that the constellation of Cancer is going to somehow collide with the constellation of Leo. Well, how does that work? Okay, so there actually was some kind of a fold in time. So what I'm showing you here is what's referred to as the linear zodiac. And you've seen a couple of pictures of the circular zodiac that, yes, was excavated, stolen, and brought to the Louvre eventually. 3 feet thick, they left the big hole, they made a mold, and what's left in Egypt is the replica. And what Svetlana says is that's not the round zodiac, that is the calendar of catastrophes. So basically, the idea is that there was a point in time that the Egyptians noted and put very definitively on the ceiling, twice in Dendera, and there's another zodiac at the Temple of Esna that cruise ships don't stop at because it's important or something. But anyway, so the linear zodiac is basically saying this is what we had in the cosmos, and then there was a disruption. And it's depicting the exact way that this happened and when. So you see combinations of 3 and 4 throughout, and it's basically speaking to the 12 constellations. And you see the figures, some of them are pointing back, some of them are pointing forward, and it's all depictions of time and cosmology. You can see the 3 Anubis. You can see that some of them have boxes that they're around. And James Ernest Brown would tell you that he's got a book called Electric Ancient Egyptians. I've edited 3 of his books. And he's talking about how they were building a charge of energy. And you've probably seen the sarcophagi of King Tut looking like they fit one inside another, like Russian dolls. But they don't fit inside each other. And the smallest one wouldn't be big enough for the sarcophagus in the first place. What they were actually doing is using gold and the conductivity and the lack of conductivity. And you see they have these platforms where they put their feet on them, and they were wooden, and they had gold shoes which would cut your feet if you wore them. And basically they were building charge in their bodies and healing themselves with all of this, which is a topic for another discussion. But when you see the boxes on the boats, the solar boats, that's depicting that they somehow were charging their energy fields. Okay, so this is a bit more of a close-up. You see the various headdresses. You see the scales here, and the whole idea of, and we saw this yesterday, the ceremony of the weighing of the heart. When you passed, basically Anubis would meet you and say, you're dead. You'd say, I am, I feel the same. No, check it out, there's your body and you're here. And the idea was you had to take your heart and put it on the scale according to have it weigh. No, it had to be lighter than a feather, or they didn't want you on the other side, okay? And so this was to teach the populace to live well. So if you were heavy of heart because you'd harmed someone, or because you weren't living in a moral way, forget it. You got stuck down in the, where the astral greeblies are, I call them, in the lower levels of the astral, and you couldn't ascend. And so this whole idea of balance and living in a balanced way was part of how they were teaching the populace to live well. And so you see the baby inside the solar disk, inside the scale. Okay, so then, now, when you're looking at the ceiling, you get a little bit dizzy because things are upside down and right side up. So I've got one of each here. So we actually were able to take these pictures with a really high quality camera on a tripod, bringing a crew of 2 to Egypt to take all these pictures so that they would be accurate and high resolution enough so you could take something that looks very small indeed if you're standing in the temple. And so it really is an opportunity to examine what's going on here. So you see the figure of Isis who's holding up the sky, and you'll see that replicated a number of times and in the calendar of catastrophes as well. But then you see the 4 wings, okay? And the 4 wings of the personification of a male with the ram head. I say, Svetlana says, this is the time frames of the precession of the equinoxes. Okay, so you see it forwards and backwards. Okay, and so often you see these hand positions. We'll see more of that as we go along. This is Thoth, and he's the record keeper. And so Christians turned it into the judgment day, where God came to say, to condemn you, and, you know, with his lightning bolt. But basically, in the fair witnessing of the ceremony of the weighing of the hearts, Thoth is the record keeper. And the question wasn't what anybody thinks. It's how do you think you did in your incarnation? What is your evaluation of what you learned and how you progressed spiritually in your own incarnation? And so here you've got Thoth with they call this the power position, and the Eye of Horus inside this device. Now they think of this as a mirror, but actually James Ernest Brown would tell you it's to get rid of the static charge when you're getting charged up in these devices. So all of this is represented on the ceiling. Okay, so you see we keep going along. I mean, it's vast and it's incredible. So for these people in the 19th century to say, this is about agriculture, is that enough? It's not enough. What are you growing? Okay, so you see them going forwards and backwards. But the other thing is, I mean, I didn't put words on these because I want you also to just feel and experience these and see if they can speak to you. Someone already said that you go to Egypt and the temples work on you, whether you know it or not, whether you're conscious of it or not, because the sacred geometry is such that the cavities in the human body are represented by the shapes and the sacred geometry of the temples themselves. So somehow they have an impact on us, whether we're conscious of it or not, which is why people who come to Egypt take a long time to process. Seeds get planted there, and a lot of people want to return because they know that they're accessing something, they're not exactly sure what it is. But that's part of the discovery, you know, because I started going to Egypt in 1977, and I had a huge impact on me, and I can't leave it alone. But slowly, the information comes through that makes more sense. So suffice it to say that this is impacting us, whether we understand it or not exactly. So all over Egypt, you'll see this winged disc. And so you see the stars at the bottom. And the winged disc is on the archway of every single temple before you go in, and usually between the different hypostyle halls. And the idea was the lower self had to surrender to the higher self, in order to step into the temple and do holy work. And so basically, it's the trash can for your ego at the door, and then you go in. And so the idea is, it's our higher self that's doing the work. We're incarnated on earth in order to take steps to become more conscious and wiser. And so the snake is a symbol of the sacred masculine, the vulture is the sacred feminine. What Hakim would tell you is that the emphasis on birds, of which there are many in hieroglyphic, is that a bird can walk on the ground and fly in the air. So we're cosmic beings having an earth experience. And there's other symbols that represent that as well. And just another salient point with hieroglyphic is that you read the hieroglyphic in the direction the birds are facing. So you'll often see a mirror image in front of a doorway where the birds are facing toward the center. So again, more details, but you can see in between the pillars, which are the capitals that have Hathor's face, there are different colors of symbolism in between them. And then you can see that what's on the walls as well. So this is still the ceiling. And what you see over and over again is 4 colors that are repeated in every temple. I think it's very, very pretty. So here we have steps of archetypal figures, of which there are 14, and then leading to the Eye of Horus that you saw in the title of the presentation as well. So each of them has different headdresses. You see them all in profile. Okay? And that's typical of Egypt. But Hathor is shown in 3D. So she's not in profile. So the metaphor is that when you see them in profile like this, they're in 3rd dimension. They're here on Earth. When you see Hathor, who's got the full face, she's actually in the 4th dimension and beyond. So there are people who talk about the Hathors, and a race of beings that actually are like standing columnar waves that can be like 22 feet high. Many people have seen them in their somehow experiences in Egypt. I have. And they're pastel colors. They can be light paint, light blue, yellow, green. And they're somehow messengers from a cosmic place that somehow want to communicate with us. Okay, so we've wiped out lots of this in terms of this society and what we're allowed to think about and what we're supposed to understand or not understand. And the Egyptians really were talking about ancestors communicating with disincarnate beings. This was completely normal to them. So for us it seems weird, but one of my favorite sayings is that weird isn't weird anymore. Now, but weird, if you look it up in the Old English dictionary, weird means becoming more yourself, which I find quite interesting. So we've been robbed of what the Egyptians were telling us by certain things that became unpopular and they'd kill you for it. My favorite is in 323 AD, Emperor Constantine made reincarnation illegal. And if you believed in it, they'd kill you. And I mean, the irony of that. So it is funny. It's funny, but and then, I mean, if you believed in tarot or astrology or numerology or any of that, oh, we have to burn you too. And if, you're into herbs and healing and natural anything, then, for sure you're gone. So then, the 19th century guys come along and look at the ceiling and, say it's 500 years old, I'm sure. And it's, as I keep saying, it's about agriculture or astrology, but, they were misguided. I mean, who would bother to put all this there if there was no good reason for it, and if it wasn't really trying to speak to our psyches in some kind of way? Now, another way of looking at this, okay, and I've always said I didn't open with this, but what's the best part of CPAK? The audience. Okay. So most of you are extremely well read, and you know a lot of things. Okay. And most of us are curious about something we remember, something that this world, it doesn't fit. What's going on in this world? Blood from death instead of blood from life. Matriarchal cultures always honored the sacred feminine, and blood from procreation. And so they, the women would gather and collect their menstrual blood, and they put it on the fields because it was the highest form of DNA. So when the patriarchs came along, they wore the red, white, and black and the skirts, and they thought, well, all we have to do is kill a lamb and get the blood. Well, blood from death isn't the same as blood from life. I'm sure you've noticed, okay? And so this whole emphasis on splitting things apart and not being holistic and not honoring nature has been the methodology with which patriarchy's gotten away, with compartmentalizing everything, need to know. If you don't get caught, it's not wrong. Okay? But that's not what was going on in Egypt in terms of connecting, understanding archetypal energies, understanding ourselves, and being more inclusive. Okay, so now you've got another eye of Horus. You've got, I'm hoping you can see well here. You've got these figures that are birds with their hands out. And there's two major concepts in Egypt that are difficult for us to understand, the Ba and the Ka. So the Egyptians didn't have a word for death, okay? They just, like I said before, they transitioned. And what the Egyptians and the high-level initiates were doing inside the Great Pyramid is practicing leaving their body, okay? Because I've done studies on what happens when you lie in the sarcophagus if your head's in the right direction. And basically it's opening up the chakras so that you can leave, but the trick is to come back. Because the initiates wanted to know, they wanted to be prepared when they went to the other side of what was going to happen, okay? And so as people become more psychic, some people, when people pass, my religious friends who've passed, they get there and they go, oh, this isn't what they told us in church at all, okay? So the Ba is the part of you that doesn't die. And that's who's greeted when they say, let's have your heart and see how you did in this incarnation. We drop our earthly suit and continue, right? And just to continue with that, the idea of why did they have, in the Valley of the Kings, why were they buried with some of their organs that were put into canopic jars in perfume, their earthly furniture, their comb, their accoutrements, raisins, wine. We need that when we're dead too. But why were they buried with all this stuff? Well, the idea is that if your present earth suit had everything it needed to do the earth life it had, then your Ba is free to go roam around and see if it wants to remain cosmic or choose another incarnation. But basically it was a way that they could finish this life by leaving all the things they had. There's another symbol where on the top of the sarcophagus you have Nui with the stars, the great cosmic star being mother. And so if you opened your eyes and you were in the sarcophagus, you would see her and she's welcoming you back to the stars, okay? So the idea is that it was a good thing to complete with this incarnation and move on to another one, but you needed to understand, how to do that well too. So whenever you see a bird, okay, thank you. Whenever you see a bird with its hands out like this, it's the Ba. The Ka, and it's also this as a hieroglyph. The Ka is your body double, and I'm just going to rush along here and show you more of these. There's that one's repeated. Okay, so let's just keep going because I've just got the sign of 20 minutes. Okay, so you see her feet here are inside the plasma as well. So her hands and feet are inside the hieroglyphic for plasma. Now, there are 26 letters in the English alphabet. There are 4,000 Egyptian symbols. English wasn't here in ancient Egypt. This emphasis on the precessional cycle, 1 cycle, 2 cycles, 3 cycles, 60,000 years ago, they weren't waiting to write your name in hieroglyphic. Lisa, L-I-S-A. No, that's not how it works. Hieroglyphic is a multi-dimensional way of talking about cosmology. And so, again, that's a subject for another topic, for another lecture. And you see how that's upside down? Okay, and I'm going to just move ahead here quickly, because there's one of those boxes again. There's the star systems, looking back in time. And it continues. Okay, so this is the round zodiac. And you can see how the white is shining through because they painted it black because the rest of it was black. But this is the sweat coming off it because this is artificial. And you see other places in the entirely old temple that have these same symbols. See on the top there, you can see how. And this is Hathor. And the whole idea of the sacred feminine. I have to say this. I ascertained that Svetlana Pavlova wouldn't have anything to do with this if she didn't already know it from before. She became, as I said, an astrophysicist and an engineer and a professor. And so I said, Svetlana, I kind of have the feeling you were there. I mean, do you think you were there? She goes, oh yeah, I was there. I was there too. You know? And so it was a real meeting of the minds. And so I said, well, could it be that you masterminded this, that you designed it? Maybe you weren't the one putting the symbols up on the ceiling, but you had something to do with it? And she's like, yeah. And so I said to her, if that's true, were you a man or a woman? Oh, she said, I was a woman. Well, of course, because all of Dendera was feminine consciousness. Okay, I think we're going to come to see the last 5,000 years as the failed experiment called patriarchy that lops off the sacred feminine, and that the rest of, we're going to see it as a patriarchal hiccup if we start looking at 60,000 or, you know, many precessional cycles. This symbol here is the Jed, which is a symbol of the masculine. Everything boils down, masculine, feminine, the contrast needing together, putting the hands down is the feminine, they call that Tit, and a Jed, okay? And here's the old temple. And some of the capitals are a little bit different. These are the ones on the outside, beautifully painted, runed. Okay, so you see over and over again, all of these are still the symbols from Dendera in the crypts. There's the lotus and wrapped around the wine jar, and they made a combination with that would loosen the grips of this earthly reality and put them into a sensual kind of state, so you see that over and over again. Okay, most people think about, when they think about Dendera, they think about the crypts and these so-called light bulbs. It's born out of the lotus at the bottom. There's a sacred masculine inside. Cathode tubes. Okay, but this is underneath the temple. There's in the second hypostyle hall, there's a little chamber, and you can see the top of the pillars of the temple that was underneath. At Abydos, you see that as well. You've got the temple of Seti I and the Osirian. In archaeology, older is deeper. These are the crypts. Those are artificial lights. Okay, so now you see the sacred feminine and other light bulbs. Most people don't notice those. Those are upstairs. Okay, sacred feminine, the seated feminine, more light bulbs. I don't know if those of you who've been to Egypt have noticed that. And sacred feminine over and over again. The singing and the dancing, a tambourine. Isis, again, a figure of the Isis holding up the ceiling. These are harps. There's a place that you climb up a ladder, and there's a chamber, a small little chamber. I just absolutely love this picture. I bet you've never seen it. Okay, again, the ba. Okay, here, the ka. The ka is the body double. Okay, when high-level initiates were able to transmute the atom, they got the abilities, telepathy, manifestation, bilocation, teleportation, alchemy. Okay, and so the body double is the part of you when you're asleep that can astral travel, and you're actually in your bed, but you're actually somewhere else. Okay, and so here you see the figures are double, double, double. Whoops. This one's actually 4, but it's not showing 4 people. It's showing our ability to replicate ourselves and do work when we're actually asleep or in an altered state of consciousness. I mean, this is really difficult to understand if you think you only live once and you've got any kind of religious beliefs. I mean, we really kind of have to, put our beliefs aside in order to accept this. But this is what the Egyptians were doing. And what I was going to say a minute ago was, if it was us, and you're here because you remember something and you can't leave it alone, And we were making a decision knowing we were going to plunge into this absolute density and insanity. What would we leave for ourselves to trigger the memory of how it used to be in a golden age? Okay? And I say that the symbolism in Egypt is what we left for ourselves to remember, which I like that thought. Now, since there was not a lot of men around in Dendera when they were doing the initiate trainings, there was a birthing chamber and all of that, they made this little dwarf the patron saint of childbirth, because you don't need women. And even in Greek mythology, once men discovered that there was something to do with procreation, because they had procreation envy, this business of penis envy and Freud, that's not what it's about. I think what that meant is women wished they had the privilege of men to be able to go out and work. But it's not that they, as I say, wanted outdoor plumbing. And so... So once they discovered that, okay, so when famine was ever imminent, there were hunter-gatherers, and they're collecting herbs, and then someone said, well, why don't we bring the herb and plant it at the mouth of the cave? Women procreated every 5 years when that was going on. And then they said, well, if we've got plants at the mouth of the cave and there's seeds, let's plant them in rows. Then they had extra food, and then they started procreating every year, and the men went, wait a minute, maybe we have something to do with this. So then you get in mythology that you don't need a womb anymore. So Zeus had a headache, and somebody hit him in the head with an axe, and here came Athena. She was born out of his head. We don't need a womb. Somebody ejaculated into a shell, here popped out Aphrodite. And so, so you know, there's been problems in how we've learned to think about things that have to do with this. Okay, I'm moving on. The outside of the temple, more winged discs, uraeus, honoring the sacred feminine, over and over and over and over. The older boy with the finger pointed toward the mouth, Horus nursing off Isis. This is another representation of Nui that's been pieced together. Okay, we're moving on. Yoga was not started in India, as far as I understand. It started in Egypt. Okay, and this is the damage. This is where the Christians sharpened their chisels, and you see that over and over and over again in Egypt, in order to create damage on these temples. But still, there's enough left for us to see and figure things out. Okay, I'm taking you somewhere else now. When you go to the Valley of the Kings, no matter what season it is, it's very, very hot. There's no trees or anything to give you any kind of shade. They've got these things where they really don't want people to understand this. Okay, they don't want people like me talking in the temples. They're certainly not allowed to talk inside the tombs. The guides have to stay outside, but they don't know what it is anyway, what's going on in there. Now they've played this game where they say you can buy a ticket and you can take pictures with your cell phone. So you go to buy a ticket and they say, no, there's no tickets. And then you get into the Valley of the Kings and they say, where's your ticket? Well, you can't buy it. Well, you can't take pictures. Give me your camera. Oh, you can buy a ticket from me. I'm going to take your camera, and if you want it back, it'll cost $100. So you end up like listening to all this, and they shout at you in the, there's nothing sacred about it. Okay, it's illegal to close your eyes at the Temple of Isis, but it's not illegal to scream and shout. Anyway, so this is a replica of the Valley of the Kings from the top in the visitor center, and this is underneath. So on my next trip to Egypt, we're doing this peaceful sailing trip. We're not even going to go there because you can't explain anything. And as I said, it's super crowded, not allowed to talk. So what do we got? Look at that. Water, energy coming off the hands. And you're going to see this whole dance with 2 right hands, 2 left hands. And it's interesting because when we're in the temples, I say, who's going to give me your left hand? And you can see the 2 left hands. Left hands, you've seen this in the pyramid code, represent receiving. The right hand represents giving. So you see, it's not they didn't know how to draw hands. They're trying to tell us something about the hemispheres of the brain. So I just find this just captivating. Okay, so here we're going to go through a series of these positions of how they're supporting each other energetically. And I just find this completely beautiful. See, over and over and over. Oh, and I'll just quickly say, you see the bands at the arms and the wrists. High-level initiates needed to have really good posture when they're dealing with terrestrial energy going into the cosmos and cosmic energy coming into their bodies. Or I say they could get electromagnetic-cuted. But these bands were, once they were trained in sex magic at the Temple of Isis. So when you see these bands, they're high-level initiates. So again, you see the symbolism of the winged discs. You see all these snakes. Okay? And again, these solar boats, because you're going on a journey to the other side. This is about becoming cosmic, of making your choices of your next incarnation. You see, there's just too much to say, but okay, so this person is they're in between lives. Okay, if you had not lived a moral life and got into and died, they didn't want you, and you had to face, as I said, the astral greeblies. So even though dynastic Egypt started in 3113 BC, was the patriarchal aspects of Egypt, there was some kind of memory of the more cosmic, saner, matriarchal, balanced times. And matriarchy doesn't mean women are dominating men, it means balance. So just quickly moving through this, he's got like feathers in each hand, going to slice through the karma. But they had to face their enemies. Okay, so for all the Ramses that cut off the hands of their enemies and were killing people left, right, and center, when they had their tombs were basically facing their enemies. This is the happy, breasted man, because they weren't hiding the feminine energy in men, and they're tying between the the masculine and the feminine, the lotus and the papyrus. But what the Egyptologists will tell you is that this is the joining of Upper and Lower Egypt, and that they were fighting. Here's the enemies. Some are headless. So once they went into the other world, they had to face all the wrongdoing that they had done. They had to bring all their prayers and wishes and the sacredness of living, the honoring of the sacred feminine. Okay? Tumbling through between incarnations, being able to leave and reconnect and decide if you wanted to reincarnate or not. Okay? And so this is what's represented in the tombs on the walls. Okay? 5 minutes. Okay. What do you think they chiseled off there? When you see baboons, they're measuring time. So this whole thing, you see Nui is on the ceiling. It's difficult to see her with the 5 stages of the sun in her body. So she would give birth to the sun in the morning and swallow it at night. Okay, so all of this is what's going to happen to you when you're between incarnations. There's all kinds of representations of bees and formulas. They're giving all these gifts, which is hoping that you'll be forgiven. So in that, those of you that were there yesterday, you saw a Horus figure on the ceremony of the weighing of the hearts holding up the scale. So you could pay the priest to hold the scale up to say, yep, your heart's light, you're good to go. But when you got over here, that didn't matter anymore. So you'd actually buy what were Shakti dolls. Okay, so all of this is all about procreation, trying to make amends for what happened in your life, the sacred masculine, the sacred feminine, and you know, the grave goods would have been within this. And I'm moving along. Sacred feminine, the lotus flower, and I'm going to be done. Okay, so I've just made a new website. All of these photographs and a virtual tour of the entirety of Egypt, of the places we went before, are represented on this, including the sailing trip that we're going to be doing. We're going to have 9 days in this 10-room sailboat, and we'll be able to sail to Dendera and Abydos instead of taking this long bus ride. So pyramidcode.online is where the website has been constructed, and it's going to stay there. It's migrating now to pyramidcode.com, and so it's a completely new website, and you can look at numerous high-definition pictures. And you're all invited to come to Egypt. There's a few people who are here in the audience who have already come, and I hope you'll consider that. Thank you very much.